How's it going, guys and girls? Hope you guys are having a great week. So I'm back today with another video, and this is actually going to be the second video in my I Recommend series, which is where I just go, off script and talk about one of the games I'm playing at the moment and give my overall review, impression, opinions on it. And today I want to talk about Loopmancer. So what is Loopmancer? For those who don't know, Loopmancer is a 2D platform roguelike action game that takes place in a very cool cyberpunk universe, and it's developed by Ebrain Studio. It's a very small indie studio, about 25 people I think in the studio, so quite a small team that have produced this game. It is set in the year 2046 in the futuristic Dragon City. You play Xiang Sishu, a hardened private detective who is killed while investigating the disappearance of a famous female journalist. You soon discover that you are caught in a time loop, and every time you die, Sishu wakes up earlier that morning and has to replay back through events, making different choices and different decisions along the way, ultimately to finish the story through a whole loop. It's a very, very addictive cycle. It's a very addictive loop. With every single death, Sishu retains his memory of events, and while investigating the missing person case, he does uncover a larger conspiracy surrounding the tragic death of his daughter and the involvement of huge corporations, crime lords, and sinister forces at play. With every new loop and path explored, Sishu gains new knowledge and becomes stronger as he tries to rescue the female reporter and uncover the mystery behind the death of his daughter, and obviously bring to justice those responsible. Loopmancer, I was very surprised actually by how much this game hooked me. I'm not a huge sort of roguelite player. I have played a couple this year. Obviously Getsu Fumaden was one that I played early in the year and I really enjoyed it, but I feel that Loopmancer gets it right. It gets that time loop mechanic right. The cyberpunk setting, the world is very, very cool. The game looks visually stunning, and I've really enjoyed my time with the game so far. So I want to delve in a little bit more detail and talk about some of the major weaknesses and strengths of the game and how the game ultimately works, so that you guys can get a better sense of if this is something that you'd be interested in checking out and jumping in and playing. So let's start with the negative and finish on the positive. So what are some of the weaknesses? Well, the story for Loopmancer is pretty, simple. It's a detective mystery story where you're trying to save this reporter while uncovering the mystery of your daughter's death and who was responsible. So it is a detective mystery game. Now, the storyline is pretty simple. It's pretty predictable. It doesn't go in crazy kind of directions. It's very cyberpunk is the world, and the corporations are really interesting and really, really cool. And you do unlock kind of codex snippets and entries as you find things in the world that does shed a little bit of light, but the story is okay. I would say it's not the most amazing story I've ever played, and I will be honest, for me a lot of the characters are quite forgettable. This isn't the writing on par with say like Cyberpunk 2077, or Deus Ex Human Revolution or Mankind Divided, which are sort of cyberpunk-esque worlds. It's not on that level. It's pretty bog standard story, but it's passable. It's a passable story, and I was interested to find out who was responsible. I was interested to find out how Zishu's story was going to unfold and ultimately end. So it did enough to hook me in, but I will say as a main character, he's pretty forgettable. He's very hardened, very, very sort of a little emo-y, not over the top emo-y, but a little bit. But it's gonna sound harsh, but I would say he's kind of got the personality of like a brown paper bag. Like, he's not a very memorable character, and considering his backstory and the tragedy in his backstory, I would have expected a little bit more in terms of character development for him. I think part of that is potentially the writing and the dialogue, which can sometimes come across as quite cheesy. It may well be the dialogue that was given, but also the voice acting, while okay and passable. It's not terrible. Is just okay. And there aren't really any massive standout performances within the game. So it suffices. It's sufficient, you know, for the story purposes. The setting is very cool. That I will say that the level designs and the environments are absolutely gorgeous. But for some reason, the cutscenes, the transitions, there are certain cutscenes through the game, particularly revolving around main story beats, boss fights, and transitions, you know, cutscenes into levels and out of levels. They are cool to a degree, but for some reason the animations and the cutscenes are a little bit janky, and the facial animations and the frame rate is just really, really poor, and it does kind of throw you out a little bit of the game, and you do kind of lose that immersion when watching them. So I feel like the cutscenes and the animations could have been a lot better, and that may well have helped the story. That might be why I wasn't really able to fully engage with the story and the characters, because I just kind of didn't believe it, you know, and it didn't pull me in. So that could very much have to do with the voice acting, the animations, and the music as well, which is okay, but there aren't any standout, you know, musical set pieces or anything like that really evokes emotion. So I would say the story of this game is probably its weakest element, but the game does have a lot of strengths, and one of its biggest strengths is the gameplay loop. This game is a lot of fun to play. As a roguelite game, it does really work. That loop cycle really, really works for the game. The gameplay loop is very fun. It's very addictive. Each loop that you actually play, each time you die and you come back, every loop is actually varied. It is different. So you might go back through levels, but certain areas of the levels that were closed to you will open up. They shake up the enemy types and as well. So you might face different enemies. There may be new pathways to follow. There may be new weapons that become available to you in that cycle that you didn't have access to before. And that kind of keeps the loops feeling fresh and different and vibrant, and so every single loop there is something different. You do learn something, you do progress forward through the story, and you do find new things out, and there are changes that occur, and that keeps it really fun and fresh. I will say as well, there are certain points in the story where you can actually make branching decisions and pathways, so you can choose which level to play next. Now, for example, there's one point where you decide to go to either Koga Industries or go to Ditch Village. Now, Ditch Village is the easier route to take, but Koga Industry is more interesting, and it may well reveal, you know, more story snippets. So there is that risk and reward in terms of which branching path you choose to take. There are certain decisions you'll make about whether to rescue particular characters or not, and those do actually have effects and consequences, and they do lead to branching paths. So it is interesting, you know, to replay back through levels. There are even certain points when Zishu will take different actions in cutscenes based on knowledge from an earlier run and foresight. So there was one really cool moment where you were going to the Tang Dynasty Hotel, and I think he was in his flying car, and you get attacked by sort of ground-to-air missiles, and in the first cutscene he didn't know that was going to happen, so he got shot down and you had to take on more enemies, and in the second one, knowing that attack was coming, he was able to dodge and counter and take different moves, go a different route. So there are things like that, you know, that foresight that does come into play, and sometimes that's very cool because you don't quite know what to expect, and there will be certain things that happen. You think, oh my god, that's really cool, that's really awesome. So the gameplay loop does really work for Loopmancer, especially with this loop cycle. It can be quite dangerous, you know, if you're playing back through the same level again. it can become very monotonous. Particular enemies, what a certain character is going to say, and it becomes repetitive, it becomes boring, it becomes dull, it becomes predictable. Thankfully, Loopmancer does not fall into that trap. Every cycle that you do play does feel new, it does feel fresh, and that keeps you wanting to play, which is really awesome. That's also supported by an incredible combat system. The combat in Loopmancer is fast, frantic, fun, fluid. It's really good. The combat is absolutely fabulous. It's very simple. It's not trying to do anything massively new or out there, but what is there does really work. So Zishu has access to a number of different weapons. You have a melee weapon. You have a ranged weapon as well, so a gun or pistol or a shotgun. You also have a tech ability as well, and that could be a grenade that you could throw out into an area. Could also be support drones that you can bring in, turrets that you can place down, and you also have a cybernetic ability which you can use, all of which are on a cooldown. So because of the variety of combat combined with the dodge mechanic, and you can also block and parry as well as you pick certain skills to level up, the combat actually is very fast and very fluid, and you can really mix together different abilities and different moves, and that keeps the combat really fun, really fluid, and really enjoyable to try out new things. One of my favorite weapons was a katana. I also had a really cool spear which I really enjoyed, and the animations are very different, the move sets and attacks are very different. And one of my favorite abilities to use was a drone which I would bring in, which would electrocute my enemies, and it very much felt like I was playing an engineer, in Mass Effect. I really enjoyed using it. So I found the combat incredibly fun, and there's so many different weapons available to you. You can unlock these with coins, so like any typical roguelite game, any enemies that you kill will drop coins, and you use these e-coins to actually purchase and unlock new weapons permanently, so that it improves the chance of them dropping in the pool at the beginning of your next cycle, because obviously when you die you lose all of your weapons and all everything that you've unlocked in that cycle. But you can also spend these coins to level up each of these weapons as well, to make them more deadly, to improve their stats and some of their abilities and their recharge times and things like that. So these e-coins it's a very precious currency. At the end of each cycle you lose all of your coins. You do have the ability to purchase permanent upgrades though, with special kind of shards that you get, and you can purchase these at the beginning of each cycle when you go back to your room, back to your apartment, and so you can actually spend permanent upgrades to increase your health, your stamina, to reduce the number of e-coins that you lose, purchase new melee abilities and counter abilities and things like that, and that just makes you stronger and more survivable with every loop, every cycle that you play. So it's a very addictive loop, in terms of the leveling and progression system is very good and it works really well, but the combat is really fun too. On top of that, there are some incredible boss fights in Loopmancer, some really good boss fights, mini bosses as well as bigger bosses, and each of them are very different, very varied, and you have to use different tactics to take them on, and the adrenaline does really go when you're fighting them, but when you beat them there is very much that sense of achievement, and you feel great and you feel powerful, and then obviously you move on to the next one. So boss fights were definitely a highlight in Loopmancer for me as well. Like I said, the level designs and the art direction in Loopmancer is some of the best I've seen this year. The levels are absolutely gorgeous. One particular standout for me was the Tang Dynasty Hotel level. I loved it. It was gorgeous. The backdrop looked amazing. And then I played this on PC and I had settings to full. So I had everything cranked to full. I had full ray tracing and everything. And God, it looked absolutely gorgeous. Like the art direction And the level designs in Loopmancer are phenomenal. Each of the different levels you can play are very different, very varied, but it very much has a feeling and style of its own, and it oozes with that style. And so yeah, it really is a, you know, a sight to behold, and it's very enjoyable to spot all the little things in the background. Of course, with every level as well, most of the levels are very linear, you know, in terms of the way that you progress through them, but there are certain exploration opportunities where you can use a grapple to get up to certain areas or unlock pathways, and exploration is really rewarded in Loopmancer. So if you do explore in a particular direction, you may well find a temporary power up that improves your survivability, your strength, your damage in the run that you're doing. So you might choose to try and find lots of these to allow you to get further through that loop before you obviously die and have to restart again. So yeah, it is very much that exploration versus risk and reward, you know, mechanic, and it works very, very well. On every level as well, there are sub challenges that you can choose to complete. This may well be killing a certain number of enemies with a particular weapon or in a particular way. It may well be using environmental damage with exploding barrels and things like that, or pushing enemies into oncoming traffic. They're a lot of fun to do. When you achieve them, you feel great. You get bonuses like extra e-coins, which help you to unlock weapons and level up weapons and abilities, but also they also unlock character sheets, which can add more context and more to your codex and give you more information, give you more knowledge, which adds more to the story and the world and the lore building. So they are very much worth doing. Loopmancer as a game, it's not trying anything massively new, but what is there is really, really good. It's a very well polished game. I didn't have any issues with frame rate drops other than some of the weird janky cutscenes, but in terms of the gameplay, everything was very fluid. It played very well, and it also offers great value for money. You can beat Loopmancer probably in about 20 hours, give or take. So for the price of £19.50, which it is on Steam and the Epic Game Store at the moment, that's great value for money. If I was to score Loopmancer, I probably would give it a 7 out of 10, and that's only because the story really wasn't as good for me as I would have liked it to have been, but the gameplay and everything else is great, and that does really push that score up. So I probably would give it a 7 out of 10, and that's my overview and impressions and thoughts on Loopmancer. I just want to say a massive thank you to Ebrain Studio for providing a review copy of the game. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed my time with the game, and I actually kind of want to jump back in again and just see all of the different combinations and things I can do with all the different weapons. I've really enjoyed playing it, and that is why I very much do recommend it to you, especially if you are a fan of roguelite games. If you do like your cyberpunk genre, I do think you will enjoy this game, and that's my take on it. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Is this a game that you're interested in? If you have any questions, please do post those below as well, and I will do my best to answer them. I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of format style of review. Please send me some feedback, always appreciated. Don't forget to support the channel by liking, commenting and subscribing. It really does help the channel to grow. Anyway, hope you guys have a great week, of course. Take care, and as always, happy gaming. Bye guys.